The corridor outside the nursery was silent, but the camera indicator glowed dark. It should have been green. He stopped, boots aligned to protocol, eyes fixed on the lens. A child's sob reached him, thin, controlled, coming from the far end where no one was posted. He checked the log panel. One entry was missing. He waited a beat longer than regulation allowed and moved. The corridor outside the nursery wing carried a different temperature from the rest of the palace. Cooler, still. The overhead lights hummed faintly, their white glow flattening the stone walls and polished floor into something clinical. The guard paused where the carpet runner ended, boots just short of the threshold. His eyes moved first to the camera dome mounted above the archway. The indicator light was dark. It should have been green. He did not reach for his radio immediately. Protocol demanded visual confirmation before escalation. He stepped forward, measured, posture unchanged, letting the sound guide him. The sobbing was quiet, controlled in the way children learned early when they didn't want to draw attention. It came from the recess beside the service alcove, a space never used for waiting. Princess Charlotte sat on the floor, her back against the wall, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her shoes were aligned neatly beside her knees, as if she had taken them off herself to be polite. Her face was blotched but dry. She was not crying now. She was holding herself still. The guard stopped 2 meters away. Not closer, not yet. "Your Royal Highness," he said low, even. No alarm, no questions. Her eyes lifted. They went to his uniform first, then his face. Recognition settled, followed by relief she did not allow to show fully. She nodded once. He glanced down the corridor in both directions. Empty. No aides, no nursery staff, no junior officer posted at the junction where one was always assigned during daytime hours. His hearing filled the silence, the distant tick of a wall clock, the soft ventilation breath through the ceiling grills. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "Were you told to wait here?" Another shake, smaller this time. He crouched slightly, not kneeling, not looming, bringing his line of sight level with hers. The marble floor radiated cold through the fabric of his trousers. He noticed her cardigan was buttoned incorrectly, one fastened higher than the other, a detail too small for a report but too wrong to ignore. "I'm here now," he said, statement not comfort. He reached back and pressed the child protection alert on his wrist console. No audible signal, silent escalation. His radio followed, clipped and precise. "Post Delta 3. I have a minor found alone in corridor 19. Initiating safeguard hold. Request immediate verification of assigned staff." Static answered first, then control, calm to the point of disinterest. "Received Delta 3, stand by." He waited, counted breaths, nothing else came. The guard's gaze returned to the camera, still dark. He shifted his weight, angling his body so that he stood between the child and the open corridor, not blocking, shielding. "May I sit?" the girl asked quietly. He nodded. She put her shoes back on before standing, careful, composed, as if she had already learned not to inconvenience the building around her. He watched her movements closely, not for threat, but for signs of shock. Her hands trembled once before she clasped them again. They sat on the low bench beneath the alcove light. He did not offer his coat. He did not touch her. Presence was enough. His wrist console chimed softly. An access log populated on the screen. Entries scrolled in neat lines. Staff movements, door cycles, escort IDs. One gap stood out. A 6-minute window with no record at all. He marked it internally, thumb hovering over the save function. Control spoke again, finally. "Delta 3 nursery reports no irregularities. Child accounted for. Return to post." The guard did not answer immediately. He looked at the girl, at the way she kept her feet together, heels touching the bench, as if trying to take up less space. "Control," he said, voice unchanged. "Escort log does not match location." A pause, shorter this time. Copy noted. No questions followed. The guard straightened, eyes lifting to the corridor beyond. Footsteps echoed somewhere distant, approaching but unhurried. He placed himself half a step closer to the child, just enough to be deliberate. Something was moving toward them. Something that believed this had already been resolved. The footsteps resolved into two figures before faces became clear. A senior nursery aide in pale blue, walking quickly but not running, and behind her a palace duty officer whose expression suggested inconvenience rather than concern. Their pace slowed when they saw the guard positioned beside the child. "There you are," the aide said, breath slightly uneven. She did not address the guard first. Her attention went to the girl. "You answered off, didn't you?" The guard watched the child's shoulders tighten. No verbal correction came from her. She looked at the floor. "She did not wander," the guard said calmly, "not raised, not confrontational. She was seated here when I arrived, no escort present." The duty officer stepped closer, boots stopping just short of protocol distance. He glanced briefly at the inactive camera, then at the guard's console. "We've confirmed all staff were in place," he said. "Nursery reports normal operations." "Then the access log is incomplete," the guard replied. He turned his wrist slightly so the officer could see the blank segment without fully relinquishing control of the display. "And post 19 was unmanned." The officer's jaw tightened. "I'll handle the report." The guard did not move his wrist back. He did not move it forward either. "With respect," he said, "the child protection hold remains active until escort continuity is verified." The aide shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable with the pause. She knelt in front of the girl now, voice softening. "It's all right. We're taking you back." The child looked up, not at the aide but at the guard. "Do you want to go with them?" he asked. He kept his tone neutral, the question procedural as allowed. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. The guard stood first. He keyed the hold into transfer mode, logging the aide's ID manually. It should have auto-populated. It didn't. Another small irregularity. "Escort accepted," Control said belatedly in his ear, as if catching up to events already past. The duty officer watched him closely now. "You've made your point." The guard inclined his head. "My responsibility." They walked. The guard positioned himself on the outer side of the corridor, the aide between him and the child. The duty officer fell back, fingers already moving over his tablet. As they passed under the camera dome, the indicator light flickered. Green, too late. At the nursery doors, the guard stopped. This was the handover line. Beyond it, his authority narrowed sharply. The aide reached for the handle. "Wait," the guard said. Both adults turned. "The child was found without footwear," he said, eyes on the aide. "Please confirm whether that aligns with nursery procedure." The aide blinked, then forced a smile. "Children remove shoes all the time." The guard nodded once, noted. He logged the response, word for word. The doors closed softly behind them. The corridor felt emptier after. The guard remained where he was for several seconds longer than necessary. He reviewed the log again. The missing 6 minutes were still missing. No retroactive entry appeared. No correction followed. His radio crackled. "Delta 3, the duty officer said, voice measured. "You're to return to standard post. This matter is concluded." The guard acknowledged. He turned back toward his position, steps precise, expression unchanged. But as he walked, he adjusted his report classification from routine safeguard to irregular incident, attaching the access anomaly and camera delay. He sent it through the internal system reserved for record integrity, not command review. The system accepted it without comment. When he reached his post, the corridor lights dimmed slightly, shifting into afternoon cycle. Somewhere above, the palace continued as it always had. The guard stood at attention, eyes forward. Behind him unseen, the record remained. And it would not disappear. The reassignment came less than 20 minutes later. It arrived without ceremony, no verbal explanation, no reprimand. Just a quiet update on the guard's wrist console redirecting him from Corridor 19 to an interior junction near the administrative wing. Temporary coverage. Duration unspecified. He acknowledged it automatically, though the timing registered. As he walked, the palace shifted around him. The nursery wing carried softer acoustics, fabric muted colors, the constant low movement of staff trained to move quietly. The administrative corridors were harder, stone floors, sharper echoes. Conversations stopped when uniforms appeared. His new post faced a cross-corridor feeding into offices reserved for senior household officials. 2 doors required dual authorization. One was rarely used. Both were closed now. He took position and began observing. Routine returned quickly, at least on the surface. Clerks passed with folders tucked close to their chests. Aides moved with purpose, eyes forward, neither hurried nor relaxed. Nothing overtly wrong, nothing that demanded intervention. That was the problem. His console chimed once. A system message confirmed receipt of his earlier report. Status, logged, no follow-up request, no clarification sought. He reviewed the phrasing again in his head. It had been factual, conservative, no speculation, just times, locations, absences. Still, the silence that followed felt deliberate. Across the corridor, the seldom-used door opened briefly. A senior offic. Isle stepped out, speaking in low tones to someone inside. The door closed before the guard could identify the second voice. The official glanced once at the guard, quick, assessing, then moved on. The guard noted the glance, not suspicious in isolation, but glances accumulated meaning. His radio crackled. Delta 3, Control said. Confirm you're settled. Confirmed, he replied. A pause followed, not technical, considered. Maintain position, no deviations. The guard said nothing more. He did not need to. Minutes passed. The light shifted subtly as clouds crossed the high windows somewhere above. The air cooled as the building's climate system adjusted. He remained still, posture exact, senses open. Then a familiar presence approached, not hurried, not cautious. Measured steps, authority carried lightly. The duty officer from earlier stopped beside him, just outside formal distance. He did not look directly at the guard at first. Quiet post, the officer said. Yes, sir. The officer clasped his hands behind his back, mirroring the guard's stance without meaning to. Your report was thorough. Thank you, sir. Another pause. The officer turned now, expression neutral. These situations can become delicate. The guard waited. Silence was safer than assumption. We rely on discretion, the officer continued, and trust in existing structures. Overcorrection can create unnecessary instability. The guard understood the language. He had heard variations of it before. Not here, not involving a child. My actions were within protocol, he said. They were, the officer agreed quickly, which is why there's no issue. No issue, no correction, no explanation for the missing log. The officer stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to suggest confidence. In future, allow the system time to reconcile before escalating. The guard met his gaze for the first time. The system reconciles records, he said evenly, not presence. The officer's expression tightened for half a second, then smoothed. Duly noted, he said, carry on. He walked away without waiting for acknowledgement. The guard returned his eyes forward. His breathing remained steady, but internally lines were being drawn, subtle, invisible, unmistakable. Protocol, he realized, was still intact, but it was being used to slow him down. The junction remained quiet longer than expected. The absence of movement became its own signal. Administrative corridors rarely stayed dormant for long. Authority required circulation. When it stopped, it meant decisions were being made elsewhere. The guard registered a soft vibration on his console, not an alert, a priority note, internal routing only. Observation requested, no action required. He read it once, then again. Observation without action was not a role, it was a restraint. He acknowledged receipt and returned the display to passive mode, though his peripheral vision continued to track every door seam, every reflection in the polished stone. A pair of aides passed through the junction, speaking in low tones that cut off the moment they noticed him. One of them glanced back after several steps, then quickened her pace. The other adjusted the folder under his arm as if to reassure himself it was still there. The guard cataloged the behavior without judgment. His radio clicked softly. Control again, but a different operator this time. Younger voice, careful. Delta 3. Confirm you did not retain any physical items from Corridor 19. The question landed cleanly, too clean. I did not, the guard replied truthfully. The toy had been logged, sealed, and transferred to evidence intake under standard procedure. Its existence was already in the system. If someone was asking now, it meant they were tracing paths. Understood, Control said. No further queries. The channel closed. The guard shifted his weight subtly, redistributing pressure in his boots. A small movement, invisible to anyone not trained to notice. He reviewed the earlier interaction again, not emotionally but structurally. Who arrived first? Who spoke for whom? Which answers came quickly and which never came at all? The rarely used door opened again. This time it stayed open. Two senior officials stood inside, voices muted but urgent. The duty officer was with them, posture deferential in a way it had not been before. The guard's presence was acknowledged only when one of the officials glanced out and paused. Is that the one? The official asked quietly. The duty officer nodded. The guard did not react. He did not look away either. The official studied him for a moment longer than courtesy required. Then the door closed. The guard's console chimed almost immediately. Post change, effective immediately. New assignment, exterior ceremonial corridor, high visibility, low access, no proximity to private wings. The reasoning was obvious. Visibility neutralized initiative. Ceremony absorbed attention. It was not punishment, it was reposit. Ironing. He accepted the change and moved without delay. As he walked, the palace felt warmer again. More footsteps, more sound. A return to surfaces meant to be seen rather than questioned. The ceremonial corridor opened ahead, sunlight filtering through tall windows, dust motes suspended in the air like frozen movement. He took his new post and locked into formal stillness. Across the hall, a small group of visitors was being guided through, voices hushed by the setting. None of them noticed the guard as anything other than part of the structure. His console vibrated one last time. Incident status closed. He did not acknowledge it. Instead, he opened a private mental register, one no system could edit. A list of details, the dark camera light, the missing 6 minutes, the misaligned buttons, the way authority had moved to contain, not correct. Protocol still held. But now it held him in place. And somewhere beyond the public corridors, a child had been left alone long enough to learn how quiet she needed to be. The ceremonial corridor followed a different rhythm. Time moved by footfall and spectacle rather than clocks. Sunlight entered through tall windows and stayed longer than it should have, warming the stone and dulling sound. The guard stood centered beneath a heraldic banner, posture fixed, eyes forward. From the outside, nothing about him suggested tension. Internally, he adjusted. High visibility posts came with predictable patterns, scheduled tour, rotating aides, Security sweeps announced well in advance. What they did not come with was access. No private wings, no service corridors, no unscheduled crossings. The palace had not removed him. It had placed him where he could be seen and counted. His console remained quiet for nearly an hour. No observation requests, no corrections. The silence felt curated. Visitors passed in small groups, guided by staff who spoke in low, reverent tones. Children pointed at uniforms. Adults glanced, then looked away. The guard registered them all without engagement, his attention split between surface routine and deeper monitoring. Reflections in polished floors, movement behind glass, the echoed delay of footsteps approaching from side halls. At precisely 14:20, a deviation occurred. A junior security officer crossed the corridor from an angle that did not align with approved routing. He moved quickly, eyes down, badge partially obscured by his jacket. The guard caught the deviation immediately, not because it was dramatic, but because it was unnecessary. The officer noticed the guard at the same moment. Their eyes met for less than a second. The officer slowed, corrected his path, and continued on without explanation. The guard noted the time. 5 minutes later, his console vibrated with a system-wide update. Temporary access restrictions in effect to private wings. No justification listed. No duration specified. He had never seen such a notice issued without an accompanying security brief. Across the corridor, the duty officer from earlier appeared again, standing with two aides near a side entrance normally reserved for staff. They spoke quietly. The aides nodded too quickly. When they dispersed, their routes avoided the guard's direct line of sight. The duty officer did not approach this time. Instead, control came through his earpiece, measured, careful. Delta 3, confirm no irregular movement observed in your sector. The wording was precise. Sector, not palace, not private wings. Negative, the guard replied. Sector normal. Copy, maintain post. The guard exhaled slowly through his nose. Not relief, regulation breathing. Movement began to thin. Tour concluded early. Staff presence reduced rather than increased, which ran counter to normal response during access restrictions. The building felt compartmentalized, as if invisible partitions had been lowered. He caught a brief reflection in the glass opposite, nursery staff moving through a distant hallway, faster than their usual pace. One of them carried a folded cardigan, pale blue. The guard's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He could not leave his post. He could not inquire without cause, and cause, he understood now, was being managed. A subtle shift in sound followed, doors closing in sequence, magnetic locks engaging, soft clicks, staggered, deliberate. The palace was narrowing itself. His console chimed once more. Position confirmed. Remain stationary. The message did not require acknowledgement. The guard remained still, eyes forward, every instinct urging motion while protocol pressed him into place. Somewhere beyond the ceremonial walls, corridors were being reassigned, access rerouted, and decisions finalized without his presence. Restricted movement, he realized, was not about safety. It was about control. The restriction became physical by late afternoon. A pair of temporary barriers appeared at the far end of the ceremonial corridor, low profile, brass-edged, the kind used during State F. Unctions, their placement redirected foot traffic subtly, guiding staff away from lateral passages that once remained open. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw complaint, but the geometry of movement had changed. The guard felt it immediately. Control did not announce the change. There was no advisory, only the quiet efficiency of implementation, as if the palace itself had decided to limit its own circulation. He registered another reflection in the glass, this time a senior aide, recognizable by posture alone, moving briskly with a security officer half a step behind. They disappeared through a service door that should have required dual clearance. It closed without hesitation. The guard marked the time again. His console vibrated, not with instruction but with data, a live schematic update. Several corridors around the private wing had shifted from yellow to red access status. One line pulsed briefly, then stabilized. The nursery wing was not highlighted. It had simply vanished from the live map. Not locked, not restricted. Removed. The guard did not react outwardly. His eyes remained forward. His shoulders stayed squared. Inside, he ran through procedure trees automatically, what the absence meant, how it could be justified, how it could be concealed within normal system behavior. A child protection zone did not disappear unless someone with sufficient authority wanted it unobserved. Footsteps approached again, this time slower, intentional. The duty officer stopped beside him, closer than before. His tone was quieter now, almost collegial. "You're doing well," he said. "Adaptability matters." The guard did not respond. "There's a lot of movement today," the officer continued. "Sensitive schedules, temporary adjustments." "Yes, sir." The officer hesitated, then lowered his voice further. "Best not to fixate on earlier irregularities. Context resolves most things." The guard turned his head a fraction, enough to acknowledge, not enough to engage. "Context doesn't restore missing data," he said. The officer's mouth tightened. "No," he agreed, "but it determines who is responsible for asking about it." He stepped back, creating distance again, authority reasserted through space. The officer left without another word. Minutes later, the palace bells sounded the half-hour. The tone reverberated through the stone, familiar and steady, a signal of continuity, of order. The guard felt none of it. His console displayed one final update for the shift, access normalization in progress. No start time, no end time. In the reflection ahead, staff began to move again, carefully, deliberately, as if testing boundaries that had just been lifted. The barriers remained in place. The nursery wing returned to the schematic view at last. Yellow, active. Too clean. The guard stored the sequence in memory, not as suspicion but as pattern. Patterns were harder to erase than reports. When his relief arrived, the transition was routine. No remarks, no tension, just the quiet exchange of position and responsibility. As he walked away from the ceremonial corridor, the palace seemed unchanged to anyone watching. Lights steady, staff composed, order intact. But the guard knew something fundamental had shifted. Movement had been restricted not to protect the child, but to protect decisions already made. And protocol, still unbroken, had been bent just enough to allow it. The summons came at the start of the next shift. It was not delivered by message or broadcast. A junior officer approached him at his post, stopped at regulation distance, and spoke quietly. "Sir, you're requested in Office 12. No urgency, no explanation." Office 12 sat within the administrative wing, behind two controlled access points and a corridor that absorbed sound. The guard walked there without altering pace. The temperature dropped as he entered, the air cooler and drier than the public spaces. The lighting softened, angled to reduce glare rather than illuminate. The door closed behind him with a muted seal. The room was modest, desk, 2 chairs, no insignia on the walls, the kind of space designed to feel neutral. A senior official stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the inner courtyard. "Thank you for coming," the official said without turning. The guard remained standing. "You may sit," the official added. The guard did not. Protocol allowed discretion in closed briefings. He exercised it. The official turned then. Middle-aged, calm expression, no visible impatience, authority carried without ornament. "I've reviewed your recent activity," the official said. "Your reports are accurate. Your conduct is within defined parameters. The guard waited. That said, the official continued, accuracy and appropriateness are not always aligned. Silence settled between them. The hum of ventilation filled the space. There are situations, the official said, where maintaining operational confidence is as important as identif. Ying deviation. The guard met his gaze. Deviation involving a minor requires escalation. Yes, the official agreed, and it received it. The guard said nothing. The official moved to the desk and placed a slim folder on its surface. He did not open it. What you encountered, he said, was not negligence. It was a temporary breakdown during a schedule adjustment. No harm occurred. Harm is not the threshold, the guard replied. Exposure is. The official's expression did not change, but his tone sharpened slightly. Exposure is managed, he said, by people with broader visibility than a single post. The guard understood the implication, perspective as hierarchy. You are respected, the official continued, which is why this conversation is private. There will be no formal note, no disciplinary action. The guard waited for the condition that would follow. In return, the official said, you will limit further internal commentary on this matter. Existing records will remain. No additional annotations. The request was framed as balance, not command. The guard considered it, not emotionally, procedurally. And if a similar irregularity occurs, he asked. The official paused before answering. Then you report it, as you did, but allow time for resolution before classifying it. Time, the guard thought, was the variable being controlled. The official straightened. You are dismissed. The guard turned to leave. His hand paused briefly on the door handle, not in hesitation but recognition. The instruction had been delivered. Not to stop, but to wait. The corridor outside Office 12 felt warmer than it should have. The guard registered the change immediately, a subtle contrast that made the air seem heavier. He adjusted his gloves as he walked, smoothing the leather along the seams, a habitual motion that kept his hands steady. The official's words replayed in fragments, not as sound but as structure. Operational confidence, broader visibility, allow time. None of it contradicted protocol outright. That was the precision of it. The instruction had been designed to sit just inside compliance. He returned to duty without incident. No change in assignment, no public acknowledgement of the meeting. To anyone observing, the day continued as scheduled. By midday, the palace had resumed its usual cadence. Staff circulated freely. Access indicators held steady. The nursery wing appeared normal on the live schematic, too normal. The guard requested a routine system check. Nothing unusual. A maintenance-level review of camera uptime across adjacent corridors. It was a permissible action, buried within dozens of similar requests made daily. The response came back quickly. System health, nominal, no interruptions recorded. He compared it against his own observations. The dark indicator light, the delayed reactivation. The answer did not match the environment he had stood in. He did not contest it. Instead, he logged a personal marker, timestamp, location, discrepancy, stored offline in his own coded shorthand. Not evidence, memory discipline. A junior aide passed him later, pushing a service cart stacked with folded linens. One item sat out of alignment on top, a small cardigan, pale blue. The aide's grip tightened when she noticed the guard looking. She corrected the stack and moved on without a word. The guard did not follow her. He did not ask. Pressure rarely arrived as force. More often, it came as repetition, small reminders of where attention was allowed to rest. His radio crackled near the end of shift. Delta 3, confirm availability for short-term coverage adjustment tomorrow. Confirmed. Assignment details to follow. The phrasing suggested preselection, not request. That evening, as the guard stood beneath the fading light of the inner court, he noticed additional patrols moving along upper balconies. Not announced, not irregular enough to challenge, enough to signal oversight. He had been seen. The palace, he understood now, was not asking for his silence. It was asking for his patience. But patience had limits defined by exposure, not instruction. As his relief approached, the guard took one last look down the corridor leading toward the private wings. The lights there dimmed fractionally, transitioning into evening mode. Order maintained. Still, somewhere within that order, a child had learned to wait alone. The guard stepped away from his post when relieved, posture unchanged. He would follow protocol, but he would not let time erase what he had already witnessed. The adjustment arrived quietly, embedded in routine. The guard's assignment the following morning placed him along a service corridor bordering the private wing, close enough to feel peripheral activity, far enough to be excluded from it. The corridor was narrow, windowless, lit by recessed fixtures that cast long shadows along the baseboards. The air smelled faintly of polish and fabric cleaner. Controlled. Maintained. He took position and listened. Service corridors spoke differently than public halls. Footsteps were faster, voices lower. Doors opened and closed with purpose rather than ceremony. He registered patterns quickly: who passed, how often, which routes were favored. Most movement aligned with expectation. One did not. At 09:17, a maintenance trolley rolled past without a handler. It coasted the last meter before stopping against the wall, its wheels turning once more before settling. That alone was not unusual. Staff often stepped ahead to badge doors. But no one followed. The guard waited the prescribed count. 10 seconds, 20. No return. He stepped forward and secured the trolley, scanning its contents without disturbing placement. Cleaning supplies, linen bundles, a sealed waste bag clipped to the side. And behind the lower shelf, partially obscured, a small object wedged between metal supports. A child's toy. Plastic, matte finish. A molded animal figure, scuffed at the edges, clean enough to suggest recent handling. It did not belong in a service corridor. It did not belong unattended. The guard did not pick it up immediately. He checked the corridor in both directions. Empty. No cameras within direct line of sight, an architectural oversight corrected in most areas but not all. He put on gloves. He lifted the toy carefully, noting its temperature: cool, not warm. It had not been carried recently. He placed it into a sterile evidence pouch from his kit, sealed it, and logged the find under standard unattended item procedure. No child reference. No speculation. His console acknowledged receipt. Item logged, route to intake. He sent it. Minutes later, the corridor came alive again. Two aides passed in quick succession, one glancing at the trolley with visible confusion before continuing on. A maintenance supervisor followed, expression tight, eyes scanning the walls rather than the floor. The guard returned to position. At 09:41, his radio crackled. Delta 3, confirm location. Confirmed. A pause. Then, did you observe any irregular items during last interval? The phrasing mirrored Control's earlier question days before. The repetition was not accidental. Yes, the guard replied. Item logged and transferred per procedure. Silence followed, longer than before. Copy, Control said finally. Stand by. The guard's senses sharpened. He watched the door seams, the reflections along the polished steel panels, the slight vibration underfoot as a distant elevator moved. At 10:03, a camera mounted at the far end of the corridor rotated, slow, deliberate, until its lens pointed directly at his position. The indicator light remained green. Someone had taken manual control. His console chimed again. A system notification this time, not control. Camera RECLIBRATION. Temporary feed interruption. 0030. 30 seconds. The guard noted the timestamp. He remained still, posture exact, eyes forward. He did not look up at the lens. He did not need to. When the feed resumed, the camera rotated back to its original position as if nothing had occurred. The corridor returned to routine motion. Staff moved again. Sound normalized. But the guard felt the shift settle in his chest. Not fear, not anger. Confirmation. The first irregularity could be explained. The second established pattern. The response arrived indirectly. At 10:17, the maintenance supervisor returned, this time accompanied by the duty officer. They approached from opposite ends of the corridor, converging without acknowledging each other until they were within speaking distance of the guard. It was coordinated, though presented as coincidence. "Morning," the duty officer said, tone neutral. "We're doing a quick inventory reconciliation." The guard inclined his head. The supervisor gestured toward the trolley. "One of ours was left unattended." "It was secured," the guard replied. "Contents intact." The supervisor nodded, relief flickering briefly before being replaced by something closer to restraint. "Nothing missing." "One item removed and logged," the guard said. He did not elaborate unless asked. The duty officer stepped closer. "A toy." "Yes, sir." "Where was it found?" "Behind the lower shelf, unsecured." The officer's gaze sharpened. "That item belongs to the nursery." The statement was declarative, not investigative. "Then it should not have been here," the guard said. A pause settled between them. The supervisor shifted his weight, eyes fixed on the floor. The duty officer looked at the camera, then back at the guard. "It's being handled," the officer said. "You followed procedure." The guard said nothing. "Future finds of that nature," the officer continued, "can be routed through supervisory channels before intake." "That would delay chain of custody," the guard replied evenly. The officer's expression tightened, then relaxed again. "Use discretion." Discretion. The word appeared again, as it had in Office 12, carrying the same careful ambiguity. "They la FT" without further comment. At intake, the guard received confirmation that the evidence pouch had been accepted and sealed. No request for clarification followed. No inquiry about origin. The system categorized it as misplaced property and closed the loop. Too quickly. During lunch rotation, the corridor quieted. The guard remained at post, observing patterns recalibrate. Staff avoided the service route where he stood, choosing longer paths instead. The avoidance was subtle but consistent. His console vibrated once more. Schedule adjustment. Temporary detail change effective immediately. He was reassigned again. This time not to ceremony, but to an interior staircase overlooking a secondary access route, visible but functionally isolated. A place where nothing of consequence was meant to pass. As he walked, he considered the toy, its condition, the lack of warmth, the absence of urgency in its retrieval. Someone had lost it. Someone had chosen not to look too hard for it. At the staircase post, he took position and scanned the levels below. Movement resumed at a measured pace as if the building had decided to exhale. Doors opened. Conversations returned. The palace restored itself. His radio crackled softly. "Delta 3, Control said. Be advised, no further action required regarding earlier item." "Understood," he replied. The channel closed. From his vantage, he could see a fragment of the private wing entrance, just enough to register silhouettes passing behind frosted glass. One small figure moved briefly through the frame, flanked closely on both sides. The movement was controlled, escorted, correct. But it had taken too long to reach that point. The guard adjusted his stance, redistributing weight, eyes forward. He did not allow his gaze to linger. Two irregularities did not make a crisis. They made a warning. And warnings, he knew, were often issued to test whether someone would look away after receiving them. The pressure changed shape. It no longer arrived as reassignment or instruction. It arrived as access, selective, conditional, and carefully framed as trust. The guard reported for duty to find his console already populated with a route brief, not a post, a path, temporary coverage through interior corridors linking administrative offices to the private wing. Duration, 40 minutes. Purpose, presence during senior movement. No names listed. He acknowledged and moved. The corridors were narrower here, ceilings lower, sound absorbed by fabric panels along the walls. Lighting shifted dynamically as he passed, sensors responding to motion in soft gradients. The palace's hidden spine, where decisions traveled before they reached public shape. At the first junction, a senior aide approached from the opposite direction and slowed when she saw him. "You're early," she said, more statement than question. "I'm en route," the guard replied. She nodded and stepped aside, pressing herself closer to the wall than necessary to let him pass. As he did, he caught the scent of her perfume, applied hastily, uneven. Her hands were clasped too tightly. At the next turn, voices carried from behind a closed door, muffled but tense. He did not slow, he did not listen intentionally. Still, fragments reached him. No record should have been created. Child was never unsupervised. Protocol allows discretion. The guard continued walking. A duty officer emerged moments later, adjusting his jacket as if he had just finished speaking for longer than intended. He stopped short when he saw the guard. "I wasn't aware this corridor was active," the officer said. "Temporary coverage," the guard replied. The officer studied him, eyes flicking briefly to the console on the guard's wrist. "Who authorized it?" "Control," the guard said, which was true. Control rarely acted alone. The officer nodded slowly. "Then you'll accompany us." "Us?" The guard followed without comment. They moved toward a small conference room near the edge of the private wing. Inside, two senior officials stood over a digital display showing access timelines. Lines intersected. Blocks shifted. Someone was editing history in real time, not deleting but smoothing. The guard was positioned near the door, not invited into the discussion, present but peripheral. "This window," one official said, tapping the screen, "should be classified as internal transition." "That requires a logged escort," another replied. "It had one," the first said. "It just wasn't captured." The guard watched the data change. A blank segment filled with a neutral entry. No name, no badge number, just staff movement confirmed. He understood then. This was not correction. It was reclassification. The duty officer glanced back at the guard. "You see how this works," he said quietly. "Irregularities don't always indicate failure. Sometimes they indicate flexibility." The guard met his gaze. Flexibility doesn't apply to child presence. The room went still. The officials turned. Not sharply, slowly assessing. One of them spoke. "Your diligence is noted, but your role does not include interpretation at this level." "My role includes protection," the guard said. "No emphasis, no challenge." A pause followed, long enough to measure. Then the display was closed. "Escort him back," the official said to the duty officer, "and restrict further access to internal mapping for this unit." The guard was led out without resistance. As they walked, the duty officer spoke under his breath. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The guard did not reply. He already understood. Authority was not misusing protocol openly. It was using it precisely, just enough to make truth adjustable. The restriction took effect immediately. By the time the guard returned to the main circulation level, his console interface had changed. Several layers of system visibility were gone, no internal mapping overlays, no live access state color coding beyond his immediate sector. He retained what protocol required for physical duty, nothing more. It was an efficient cut, clean, difficult to contest. He resumed post near a transitional corridor where staff moved between administrative offices and public-facing halls. The sounds were familiar again, measured footsteps, controlled voices, the distant echo of doors closing with practiced restraint. On the surface, the palace had returned to balance. But balance, he knew now, could be engineered. A senior aide passed him carrying a tablet, screen angled inward. As she walked, a notification banner flashed briefly before she covered it with her hand. He caught just enough to register the heading, revised timeline approved. She did not look at him. Minutes later, Control checked in. The tone was neutral, procedural. Delta 3, confirm systems functioning within your scope. Confirmed. Good, maintain standard reporting thresholds. Standard, the word landed with weight. The guard stood still, posture unchanged, but his internal calculus adjusted. He no longer evaluated events by anomaly alone. He evaluated response velocity, who arrived first, who spoke last, which questions were asked and which were preempted. A pair of junior staff crossed the corridor, whispering. Their conversation stopped the instant they noticed him. One of them exhaled sharply, as if releasing tension she had been holding too long. The other nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and guided her away by the elbow. Fear, he noted, was spreading downward. Toward the end of the shift, he was passed by a familiar figure at a distance, the child's senior attendant. She walked with precise posture, eyes forward, expression composed. But her pace was faster than usual, too fast for calm. She did not look toward the guard. When she disappeared around the corner, a new directive populated his console. Reminder: verbal interactions with an ON security staff should remain minimal. It was not an order, it was a warning framed as efficiency. The guard acknowledged it. As evening settled, the palace lights shifted into night configuration, warmer tones, softer shadows, an illusion of safety designed for those who never walked the service corridors after dark. The guard remained at his post until relieved. The exchange was brief, professional, no mention of the day's events. As he walked away, he passed a glass partition overlooking a quiet interior passage. For a moment, he saw movement reflected there, small, controlled, flanked closely on both sides. The child again, properly escorted, precisely managed. Correct by the palace's definition. The guard did not slow, he did not turn. Authority had made its position clear. It would not deny what had happened. It would redefine it. And in doing so, it expected him to understand the boundary, not just of his duty, but of how far truth was allowed to travel within these walls. He understood, but understanding did not equal agreement. And protocol, however precisely used, still existed for a reason that could not be edited away. The order arrived just after dusk. Not through control, not through his console. It came from a captain he had not spoken to in years, delivered in person with the tone of routine authority. Delta 3, the captain said, stopping at formal distance, you're reassigned, immediate. The guard acknowledged and followed. They moved through a sequence of corridors that narrowed gradually, the architecture shifting from ceremonial openness to functional restraint. The air cooled with each turn. Sound softened. The palace's deeper layers closed in around them. The destination was a junction corridor bordering the private wing, one he had not been allowed near since the first incident. Temporary barriers stood folded against the walls now, removed but not stored away. The lights were dimmer than standard, calibrated for evening movement. "You'll hold here," the captain said. "Short duration." "No details?" the guard asked. The captain's eyes flicked brief. "Lie down the corridor. Movement scheduled. You're here to ensure it stays clean." Clean, not safe, not supervised. The guard took position. Minutes passed. The silence carried weight. Then came footsteps, multiple, synchronized, approaching from the far end. A formation, not a walk. The guard adjusted his stance, widening slightly, anchoring himself to the corridor. The group emerged. 2 senior aides in front, faces composed, followed by a security officer he did not recognize. Between them, partially obscured, was the child. Princess Charlotte walked with her hands folded, head level, expression carefully neutral. She was not distressed. She was controlled. No visible escort identification displayed. The guard stepped forward 1 pace, not blocking yet, signaling. "Escort verification," he said. The lead aide slowed. "Orders are in place." "I require visual confirmation," the guard replied. The aide's smile was thin. "This has been cleared." Behind them, the corridor doors began to close, one by one, soft seals engaging, the palace narrowing again. The guard felt the pressure settle, rank against procedure, momentum against pause. He looked at the child. She met his eyes for a fraction of a second. Nothing passed between them that could be called a signal, only recognition. "Hold," he said. The word carried farther than it should have in the narrow corridor. The group stopped. The security officer shifted his weight, hand moving closer to his radio. The aides exchanged a look, calculated, restrained. "You're out of position," the lead aide said quietly. "I am in position," the guard replied. "Child movement requires logged escort and open corridor access." The aide inhaled slowly. "You've been instructed to allow resolution time." "This is not resolution," the guard said. "This is movement without record." Footsteps sounded behind him now, authority converging. The captain reappeared at the far end, flanked by 2 officers. Their pace was unhurried, confident. "Stand down," the captain said, voice calm. The guard did not move. "This corridor is closed," the captain continued. "You are obstructing authorized transit." The guard planted his boots squarely on the stone. He did not raise his voice. "Then document it," he said, "and open the corridor." The captain's expression hardened. "Last warning." The guard felt the line beneath his feet. The invisible one protocol rarely forced anyone to stand on. He shifted half a step forward. "Blocking now." The palace held its breath. The captain did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You will step aside," he said evenly. "Now." The guard remained where he was. His boots were aligned with the corridor's center line, shoulders squared, body positioned not as a threat but as an obstacle. The stance was deliberate, defensive, controlled, unmistakable. Behind the aides, the child shifted her weight. The movement was small, contained, but it broke the symmetry of the formation. One aide placed a hand lightly at her back, guiding without touching skin. The guard saw it. "Escort credentials," he said again. "Log number." Silence followed, not confusion, calculation. The security officer nearest the child spoke quietly into his radio, turning slightly away. The aides did not answer. They did not argue either. They waited for authority to overtake procedure. The captain stepped closer, stopping just short of contact. His voice lowered. "You're forcing escalation." The guard met his eyes. "This is escalation." A pause. Then the captain turned his head slightly, signaling one of the officers behind him. A console chimed somewhere in the corridor, system-level override access being prepared. The guard felt the shift immediately. Magnetic locks disengaged, then re-engaged in a new sequence. The palace reconfiguring itself around the confrontation. "Last opportunity," the captain said. Stand down and this ends cleanly. The guard looked past him, down the corridor where doors had sealed shut. No lateral exits, no witnesses beyond those already involved. Then he looked at the child. She was standing very still, too still for someone her age. Her hands were clasped in front of her, fingers pressed together until the knuckles lightened. Her eyes were dry, focused, waiting. He activated his radio. "Control," he said, voice steady. "I am invoking Emergency Child Protection Authority. Corridor blocked due to incomplete escort verification." The channel exploded briefly, overlapping voices, clipped commands, then a sharp cut. The captain's expression changed, not anger, alarm. "You don't have." "I do," the guard said, "for as long as the child remains undocumented in transit." The aides stepped back half a pace instinctively, the formation breaking despite their control. The security officer hesitated, caught between chain of command and visible breach. From somewhere above, an alarm tone sounded, not loud, not urgent. A system notification audible only to staff. Attention without spectacle. The guard did not move. Seconds stretched, long enough for records to catch up, long enough for authority to realize it had been forced into visibility. A senior official appeared at the far end of the corridor, breath controlled, face unreadable. He took in the scene in one sweep, the blocked passage, the child, the gathered ranks. "Open the corridor," he said. The captain hesitated, then gestured, the seals disengaged. "And log the escort," the official continued. "Now." A console chimed, a name appeared, a badge number, retroactive but present. The official looked at the guard. "Stand down." The guard stepped aside. The group moved again, slower this time, the formation reassembled but no longer seamless. As the child passed him, she did not look up, but her shoulders lowered a fraction, tension easing just enough to be perceptible to someone watching closely. Then they were gone. The corridor emptied, the doors remained open. The captain exhaled slowly and turned to the guard. "You've crossed a line." The guard inclined his head. "I held one." No one answered that. Later, alone at his post, the guard reviewed the system log. The escort entry existed now, time-stamped after the fact, clean, complete. But the emergency invocation remained too. Uneditable. The palace would absorb the disruption, authority would adjust, explanations would circulate quietly. But for one moment, protocol had done what it was meant to do, not preserve order but interrupt it. And the guard knew the cost would follow. Just not immediately. The review began before dawn. The guard knew it had started not because anyone told him, but because the palace felt different. Quieter in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Movement resumed on schedule, yet every footstep carried a fraction more restraint, as if the building itself were listening. His console displayed no reprimand, no suspension, no commendation, only a notice of mandatory availability for internal consultation, open-ended, undefined. He reported as usual. At his post near the inner court, the air was cool and smelled faintly of stone dampened overnight. Light filtered down from high windows, pale and diffuse. Staff passed him with professional neutrality. No looks held too long, no whispered exchanges that reached his ears. If he was being discussed, it was happening elsewhere. He reviewed the corridor storm again, not as memory but as sequence. The moment he stepped forward, the pause before the override, the official's arrival, the retroactive log. Everything that mattered had happened in less than 3 minutes. The palace had survived longer disruptions. Mid-morning, a senior clerk approached with a tablet held flat against her chest. "Sir," she said, stopping at protocol distance, "you're requested in Review Room C." No tone, no implication. Review Room C was windowless and deliberately plain. A table, 3 chairs, no insignia, the kind of space designed to produce statements, not reactions. Two officials were already seated when he entered, not the captain, not the duty officer, higher. Their presence explained the silence. "Please sit," one said. The guard did. "We are conducting a limited procedural review," the official continued. "Your actions during last evening's escort interruption are under consideration." The phrasing was careful. Interruption, not obstruction. "You invoked emergency authority," the second official said, "correctly by definition." The guard nodded once. "However," the first continued, "the context was complex. Senior movements were underway. Discretion had been exercised." "Discretion does not supersede child protection thresholds," the guard replied. Neither official challenged the statement. "That is noted," the first said, "and reflected in the record." A pause followed, not adversarial, assessing. "There will be no disciplinary action," the second official said, "nor will there be formal acknowledgement." The guard waited. "You will be reassigned temporarily," the first added. "Non-sensitive coverage, duration to be determined. Visibility without access." "And the child?" the guard asked. The officials exchanged a glance. "She remains under appropriate supervision," one said, "at all times." The answer was complete in structure, if not in substance. The meeting ended without ceremony. No warning, no reassurance. The guard returned to duty under a revised roster that placed him on exterior ceremonial coverage, public, static, distant from private wings. Days passed. The palace resumed its rhythm. Tour continued. Functions were held. No further irregularities were logged. The emergency invocation sat in the system, sealed and dormant. It could not be removed, but it could be outpaced by time. On the fourth evening, as the guard stood beneath the outer archway, he saw the child again at a distance, crossing an interior balcony behind glass, accompanied properly this time. Her stride was even, her posture correct. She did not look toward him. He did not expect her to. What remained unsettled was not what had happened, but what had nearly been allowed to pass unrecorded. The guard remained at attention as the light faded, and the palace settled into night. Behind the walls, decisions continued to move quietly. And somewhere within the system, a single interruption remained, waiting to be interpreted. The reassignment lasted longer than anyone said it would. Weeks passed in measured repetition, exterior corridors, ceremonial coverage, predictable schedules shaped around visibility rather than responsibility. The guard learned the new rhythm without resistance. He stood where he was placed. He followed protocol as precisely as ever. Nothing more was asked of him. That absence became the message. The palace did not punish him. It absorbed him, reduced his proximity to anything that required judgment, not as reprisal, but as insulation. Internally, the system stabilized. Revised timelines held. Escort logs populated cleanly. Camera feeds aligned perfectly with records. No further anomalies surfaced, at least not within the reach he had been allowed to retain. The interruption had been contained. One afternoon, a routine systems bulletin appeared on his console, an archive update noting the formal closure of the limited procedural review. No conclusions listed, no findings summarized, only a final status, resolved. He acknowledged it. On the same day, he noticed a small change in the ceremonial roster. A junior guard was assigned to a corridor near the nursery wing for the first time in weeks. The posting was subtle, temporary, framed as routine rotation. The guard noted it without reaction. Late that evening, as the palace quieted, the duty officer passed him in the outer hall. Their eyes met briefly. No hostility, no apology, just mutual recognition of a boundary that now existed clearly for both of them. "You're steady," the officer said, almost conversational. Yes, sir. That matters. The officer continued on. Near the end of the shift, the guard reviewed his internal register one final time. Not the official logs, his own markers, times, places, absences. He did not add to it. He did not erase anything. It was complete. When relief arrived, the transition was uneventful. The guard walked the long way out through the outer court, boots echoing softly against stone worn smooth by centuries of ordered movement. As he passed beneath the final arch, he paused, not visibly, not enough to draw notice, but long enough to feel the night air change against his face. Cooler, unmanaged, honest. Inside the palace, protocol continued its work, authority adjusted, records aligned. The child remained protected, now visibly, correctly, as if that had always been the case. Outwardly, nothing had changed. But somewhere deep in the system, there existed a moment that could not be rewritten. A corridor briefly blocked, a record forced to exist, a pause where authority had been made to wait. The guard stepped forward into the darkness beyond the gates, posture unchanged. He did not know whether the interruption would ever matter again. Only that when it did, someone would find it and understand why it had been necessary.